Marathon is teeing up one of the worst solo experiences that has ever been seen in extraction shooter history because of some insane design decisions that seem like good ideas on the surface but are much more impactful than at first glance. I have played thousands of hours of Escape from Tarkov and have dabbled with almost all of the other extraction shooters that have come and gone. Every game that goes down this route of enforced squads, which Marathon is doing with its 3-player squad fill being on by default, ends up being inundated by community requests for a solo queue to give individual players a chance to experience the game on their own, and in Marathon it's actually even worse than it normally is. The way Marathon presents its squad-style gameplay in a more casual format is nothing new to the extraction shooter genre, and there are 3 main features that this game uses that distinctly sets it apart from the big daddy Escape from Tarkov. These are no friendly fire, indicators for teammates, and the revive mechanic. This is a classic format for the newer games that have more recently launched, such as Arena Breakout and Delta Force, and in trying to make something like Tarkov more accessible to the masses, they crucify solo players and ensure that they can never play the game at all, at least not reasonably. Friendly fire is pretty obvious. If you can't hurt your own teammates, it matters much less when they are stood in the way when you shoot. This makes positioning within your squad much less important, and combines with the teammate indicators to ensure that you'll never get confused between friends and enemies either. So you're unlikely to shoot them in the first place, but even if they are in the way, it doesn't matter. Within a game like Tarkov, having to communicate with your team is absolutely critical, as it can be hard to identify friend from foe, and if you get it wrong, they die at your hands. This is a serious difference between these two games, and the balance between teams and solo actually rests on this mechanic too. Squads get the added firepower, more eyes, and support from teammates when in trouble, with the downside being that you have to be super careful with target identification and teamwork and comms. Solos, on the other hand, have no backup and rely on themselves for everything, but they can shoot on sight without hesitation. This interplay makes a game like Tarkov interesting. You never know how many you're going to be playing against in each engagement, and whether that second or third player killed is actually the last in the squad. Marathon does away with this, as you know each fight will have exactly 3 players 99.9% of the time, and this is practically guaranteed because of the revive mechanic. Many extraction and battle royale games now have so-called down states and ways to bring your teammates back from the dead, but they usually come with limitations, specific points to respawn at, a total number of lives before your character dies permanently, lower max HP, and so on. In Marathon, however, there are no long-term ramifications of being revived at all. It has the down state like many others, as well as a dead state if you get damaged further while you're down. But after the battle, your buddies can simply walk up to you and bring you back, with no penalties or losses of any kind. This means that, as a solo player, you'll always run into a full health 3-man every time you start a new fight. No lowered HP, no lingering status effects, all the downside in Marathon is limited to that specific fight that you're in, and afterwards all is forgiven, even death. Because of this, getting a pick as a solo means nothing. You can be engaged by the second while the third reses, removing any possibility of large tactical flanks to continue the fight to your advantage. Hanging over the whole system, we have Marathon's Time to Kill. As an Apex Legends style sci-fi game, the introduction of shields always inevitably increases TTK, especially for the starter weapons. In fact, this is one of the reasons a very similar looking extraction shooter, The Cycle, fell down on exactly the same problem. Solo players in a high TTK environment simply can't put out the damage required to take on 3 players, even when they are more skilled. In fairness, Marathon's TTK does feel less punishing than in The Cycle, but it's just less of something on the same spectrum. Contrasting to Tarkov, Time to Kill is very dependent on ammo and armor, but outside of special cases, a shot to the face is usually fatal with 1 bullet. Although it's unlikely that a newer player with entry-level weapons is going to take down an average duo or trio, because of the health mechanics it's still possible, and the possibility alone is a driving factor in that game's success. You'll never know when you'll hit that lucky shot, or an enemy player will mess up and give you the opportunity to get a huge come-up. Such a thing simply cannot happen in Marathon, outside of well-placed headshots with powerful long-range weapons that you don't even have access to early on. Rather than the odds just being stacked against you, the game's mechanics make it impossible. If you didn't think that that was already bad enough, then we have the runner abilities. Teams will usually use 3 different runners with different abilities, and these overlap synergistically to make you greater as a squad than the sum of your individual characters. Compared to a solo player of just 1, a team might be more like 3.5 players through the skills. One is invis hunting you, the other has you marked through the in-game wall hack skill, and the other is charging at you with a shield. As the game is balanced for these skills to be used together, you're missing part of the overall toolkit when playing with just one runner. Over time, maybe we'll figure out how to play solo against other players with specific weapons and runner builds. But PvE is even worse. The amount of shots that even basic enemies take to go down with is insane, being designed to have 3 players shooting them at once rather than 1, and the starter guns are something like a magazine per enemy. I have been wondering if this is an unfair take. Tarkov scavs are really hard when you first start playing, before figuring out how they work and are using mainly guns with bad ammo and iron sights, but they become fairly trivial later on with better weapons and ammo. Maybe we just need more time in Marathon to get used to fighting the different types of threats that we encounter and higher damage guns. But in Tarkov, for example, you could usually play slow and peek corners to get single shots off and take out AI, even with rubbish gear. Again, this is just not possible in Marathon, with most enemies outside of the basic UESC bots sponging so many shots from the standard assault rifle to kill, even with quite a few headshots. One of the biggest issues that I have with Marathon as a whole at the moment is the feeling of a wasted opportunity. I'm actually one of the people that really likes the aesthetic and design of the world. I can give creative license to a futuristic setting, and I'm forgiving about that kind of stuff anyway, but I can't help feel that I'd rather see a 10-part series on Netflix in this universe than play the extraction shooter version. The cinematic trailer that they showed as part of the release is truly very, very good. I feel like I want more of that, not cookie-cutter extraction shooter gameplay. And that comes to the crux of the problem for me so far, even outside of the solo issues. I feel that the Bungie devs have missed the point around launching an extraction shooter in 2025, and there was a specific moment of the announcement cast that caught my attention, in particular around how they think about the most important part of the game: why should I progress?
What do I do with the loot when I extract? Like, why does it matter in the long run?
Yeah, there's a variety of reasons. So a lot of it was related to sort of our factions and contract system.
We've got this entire system we call factions. You're doing contracts, they're like missions. There's also this other meta layer where, as you're working with the different factions, they allow you to upgrade yourself over time, and so you can increase your heat meter, you can increase your loot speed, things like that.
I was gonna say, you're trying to get as much loot as possible to meet the challenge of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like essentially, different missions get harder over time, right? Which
Yeah.
means you want to have more loot on you so you can survive longer,
Yeah.
so just in general, be able to do fight all the different, hostile entities in the world, like get through there's a POI on a zone that's heavily fortified by UESC and all of the different units that are there, the snipers, the assault units, like you want to be able to not only withstand that and players. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to get loot again.
The issue with their answer is not that it is wrong per se, it's just that it's not compelling. They should have answered a slightly different question here. Why should we loot and progress in your game rather than Escape from Tarkov, or Hunt Showdown, or Dark and Darker, or Grey Zone Warfare, and all the rest? This, to me, is the biggest failing of what we have seen in Marathon so far, is that it's missing something unique that makes it stand out against the other attempts that we have seen, and the art style is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Graphics are important, but gameplay is what makes the difference in extraction shooters, and not just the minute-to-minute gameplay either, it's the longer consequences of your actions. Should I stay and loot more, or just extract with what I have? How damaged am I, and am I nearly out of resources if I get into another fight? But I have that one item that means that I can slowly get my actual permanent progression in this game. In Marathon so far, we aren't asked to answer these questions in anywhere near as much detail as a game like Tarkov. Maybe that is okay for the audience they are going for, but for the core extraction shooter fanbase, I don't think this will be enough. I do think that this will get an audience on console though, especially those people who haven't really played extraction shooters before. On console, we haven't seen that many iterations of extraction shooters like we've seen on PC, and I think many people will be pleasantly surprised at the experience if it's their first time. One of these that console players didn't get a chance to play is the Cycle. Marathon reminds me a lot of this game, which I've mentioned briefly already. It's as if that game had a baby with Apex Legends. The Cycle was a pretty decent extraction shooter, but unfortunately being pretty decent isn't enough, and this game died for a few reasons, one big one being cheaters that we haven't even touched on at all with Marathon in the public discussions yet, I feel. This is somewhat surprising given it's something that every FPS dev team has to worry about, and doubly so in this genre because A, the stakes are so much higher, B, the big guys struggle to deal with this problem, and C, it's absolutely rife in extraction shooter games in particular. But I can see the same repeated mistakes of the Cycle coming back here in Marathon too. The high TTK and the single-minded squad focus, which affects everything from PvP to the harder PvE encounters, the lack of satisfying loot, which really drives the overall gameplay loop, and a failure to engage players with the lore and the setting as to why we're there in the first place and what we're even doing. Loot in Marathon at the moment reminds me of a slightly better Call of Duty DMZ. Many of the items that you pick up are just placeholders for cash, with the exact value directly overlaid in the menu. They may as well just be stacks of money, as they get liquidated into credits at the end of a round automatically. There is no hideout style mechanic here. Instead, Marathon leans into a permanent upgrade system with items that do need to be found for it. And this can be anything from increasing stash space to unlocking items for sale directly from the factions to actual stat bonuses from your character. These items can be used for some barters as well, but with the tiny stash space that you start with, it's very difficult to balance what you need to store for the very next unlocks versus rare ingredients that you pick up now that need to probably be used later on. Likewise, the part of the game that still has me super intrigued is the story and lore angle. Everyone keeps saying that Bungie is excellent at this gameplay-led storytelling, but so far in Marathon, they've done an absolutely terrible job of explaining exactly what we're there for, why it matters, and what we're broadly aiming for. An example of a game that did this excellently and naturally is Helldivers 2. Interestingly, this game is also technically an extraction shooter game, although no one ever thinks of it in those terms because it's PvE, a third person, and plays out very differently. But from the initial cinematic that you are forced to watch when the game first opens to the tone of the tutorial, Helldivers sets the scene almost immediately, and you can see how you fit into that world that the game is showcasing. Without having gone and watched an hour or so of videos of the lore from the previous Marathon games, much of the alpha test would have actually been lost on me. The UESC Marathon colony ship that presumably the whole game revolves around ultimately is barely mentioned and is not present at all in the gameplay that we've seen so far. The aliens that attacked are shown in glimpses in the cinematic trailer, but don't feature at all in the early stages of the game either. Behind the scenes, we've heard teases that you can actually visit the ship and it's the final map that will be included as part of the game, but so far there have been no references to being able to do that at all. This could easily lead a player to conclude that nothing interesting is going to happen outside of upgrading your character a bit over time so that you can go back into the same maps to farm items around the same old PvP over and over. If Marathon wants to capture players' interest, it needs a proper hook. The minute-to-minute extraction gameplay is not enough for this unless it's doing something very different, which Marathon isn't. Even the cycle did something different, which was the persistently open maps, with players entering and extracting dynamically, leading to interesting encounters and looting, and very importantly, extremely low times to load into the game. Apparently, Marathon did start out this way too, but they canned it because it wasn't good to play, so they say. This means that all players spawn in at the same time like in Tarkov, which has already led to the same types of, oh, we ran into another squad 30 seconds in at the next spawn and all died, which is pretty demoralizing. How exactly Bungie comes up with a unique hook for this game, I don't know, as I'm not a game designer, but perhaps something a little more structured without being linear, such as we're here on these basic maps gathering materials and upgrading your stuff, with the ultimate goal to put together a decryption device to get a raid into the Marathon ship, which has special resources and endgame challenges to complete. Bungie don't necessarily have to change the gameplay for this kind of idea, it's more about the narrative, which gets players pumped to come back and discover the secrets of the world that have been built, a teaser for what is to come. Sci-fi games like Marathon are already running an uphill battle against grounded and realistic games like Tarkov. Simply calling the game Escape from Tarkov and then dropping the player into a post-apocalyptic style city states the premise already. We know what we're supposed to do just from the context. In a sci-fi game though, the devs have to work that much harder to make things understandable to the player. Because nothing is familiar, it takes more investment to get people to care about your world and understand what is at stake. All the prefab 3D printed buildings make sense when you understand that this is an Earth colony launched from the Marathon ship above, with things getting set up as fast as possible on the surface, but without that context the design choices feel more random. Even the premise of our character is strange. We're a shell with a downloaded consciousness working for the benefit of megacorps to make more money. It's not really the most compelling reason to do things that I've ever seen. The other unique factor that has been mentioned by the devs is the build crafting. This is how they argue that the game is more of a class-based shooter than a hero shooter and has deep mechanics, despite the selectable characters and abilities that go with them. I can imagine it, even though I haven't experienced it yet. A combination of the implants and cores, of which you can have 5 total between the two, each giving different buffs and ability-altering upgrades that could lead to different builds with the runner as the base. But early on, this is certainly not the case. The abilities are much more impactful than anything you have in your gear set, and that's if you have anything to use at all in those slots whatsoever. I feel that it would have been much better to have a level 0 set of implants and cores, so to speak, that you can switch about at 0 cost to begin with, rather than these just being blank, to at least let you get used to leaning your build one way or another. Alongside this, the weapons can be modded too, but it's pretty limited, with 4 slots for specific mods depending on the gun. What's really odd about this is that once the mods are applied, they cannot be taken back off again. I can't imagine that this won't change, as if they're serious about build crafting being a core feature that makes the game interesting, locking mods once placed is a seriously bizarre decision. So overall, perhaps the build crafting system in the later game will eventually let solo players lean into a specific playstyle that lets you compete with the squads, but based on the devs' responses so far, it seems unlikely. Solo play is very much an afterthought, having already been pushed back on when asked for a solo queue, and unfortunately, this is a real problem for a lot of players. You don't always have a perfect 3-man team ready to go every time you want to run a raid. Sometimes you even have too many people, and plenty of players just want to run on their own sometimes. But with squad fill on by default, and I've had to turn it off every time I get back to that same menu, it's going to be practically impossible for most solos to play without being forced to raid with 2 random people that you don't even know. I genuinely believe that Marathon could turn into a fantastic game, but the squad play thing as it is as close to a deal breaker for me as you can get. So as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.